I've had my questions about Missouri's name, image, and likeness game lately, but over the past few days, legislatively and also in my own attitudes, been some real positive changes. So let's talk about why Missouri could be a real big player in NIL moving forward, coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. Thanks for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and now on the SiriusXM app as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. And, well, quite honestly, since I haven't been going every day here during the off-season portion of the calendar, well, I haven't talked about the new legislation coming out of the state of Missouri. Now a revised Missouri NIL law allows high schoolers to get paid as soon as they sign with an in-state school. This is the description of On3's Twitter account, by the way. On3 now. One of the bigger, I would say, sports premium sites, along with the athletic rivals and all that good deal. On3 being definitely the newest entrant into that space. But On3 also then says they're the first state that I'm aware of to basically implement that you're allowed to use NIL for recruiting. So again, if you're a high school recruit with Mizzou, well, you can start cashing in already. Hey, if I'm Ryan Wingo, the 5-star receiver from St. Louis in particular, that's pretty interesting to me, right? I wouldn't mind getting some of that money early and often. And speaking of just getting your money in general, well, some of you may be well aware that Laurence Bowers is one of the head guys over at Missouri's sort of official collective, their official NIL collective, for lack of a better term. What is it, every true son, every tiger type thing? I'm sorry, I forget the title. But the point here is that Bowers knows a lot more than what I do and what you who are listening to this podcast do. So let's listen to him real quickly. And a lot of what, of course, has gotten this conversation going, especially from my perspective, from my end as a podcaster here, is Missouri's been coming up just a tiny bit short in terms of basketball recruiting here. And I really do mean a tiny bit. Often it seems like the perception that's been out there, Missouri's been in second place to guys like Matthew Cleveland, Caden Shedrick. Well, in particular, Cleveland, a guy who previously played at Florida State and was taunting Miami fans at one point. Well, what would get him to go to the U? Apparently some money, because, well, a lot of reporting out there about how the University of Miami has a really strong NIL collective, especially for basketball purposes. But speaking of the Florida area, well, there's a guy online named Trilly Donovan, not Billy Donovan. No, that's a real person who used to coach at the University of Florida. But Trilly Donovan is apparently a Twitter account that apparently some people out there tend to enjoy. Whether he has good information, I really have no idea. But from my perspective, if you're going to be out there trying to break news and act like you're a real journalist with sources and all that stuff, well, maybe let's just see your real name and face. Call me old school, but that's just how I get down with the whole thing. But to the point, Laurence Bowers actually came on the Power Mizzou website, and apparently he had heard about enough of people sort of throwing out misinformation and drawing their own probably false conclusions about name, image, and likeness, specifically as it relates to Missouri. So I just want to read to you verbatim what Laurence said. He said, "Number one, I've never heard of this Trilly guy. Haven't had a single conversation, so how he supposedly knows our financial state is beyond comical. It's a complete joke. Two, you won't ever hear a single athlete tell you that we haven't fulfilled, what was promised in contracts. Can't say the same about many other universities' collectives. Well, a little shot across the bow there by Laurence Bowers. Now I continue here. Number 3, we are not going to be negligent with hard-earned donor dollars. We owe it to those of you who support to be honest and fair when it comes to what we will offer versus what is a delusional ask from a kid in their camp. And finally, 4th here, don't take the slightest thing you hear and read and run with it. There are so many misnomers being put into social media about NIL numbers. Truthfully, no one knows what numbers are accurate besides the collective and the university. There has to be trust involved here. So obviously a lot to analyze and assess there with what Laurence Bowers said. I think over the long term, I'm sure Laurence knows what he's talking about here. If Missouri is truly their collectives, especially this collective, the one that Bowers is involved in, if they're truly, you're getting what you're being promised, well, that's actually going to work for the long term. Because if it's indeed true that there are a bunch of universities out there that have collectives, there have been guys that have been burned, maybe haven't gotten their money yet, well, maybe there's some legitimate legal action that they can go through to recover that money. But guess what legal action costs? More money. And it's often just ridiculously time-consuming in this country as well. Right to a fair trial? Not so much. So the point is, this is a big benefit in Missouri's favor. If they're playing the long game and actually trying to be truthful and above board with all this stuff, actually I think there's an advantage to that. Yeah, maybe it means Matthew Cleveland or, again, this is speculation here. Whoever Missouri has just missed out on, perhaps for NIL reasons, again, with the combination of how Laurence Bowers and his team seems to be playing this, I believe Laurence Bowers, well, also on top of that, a real apparent legislative advantage here, which, I don't know, isn't always necessarily the case in Missouri. I know a lot of people are upset that sports gambling has still hit yet another snag, but at least in this particular case, I think the Missouri legislature has done Mizzou a favor. So hopefully over the long term, Missouri is going to play the long game, and, well, maybe as soon as, honestly, next season, we could see some real results here. And coming up, ladies and gentlemen, I am indeed a man of my word. I talked to the people over at Campbell University, so we have an answer about Ricky Clemons Jr. So I want to give that to you on the other side of this break. But first, you know what? It's that time of year. It's pool season. It's almost Memorial Day. You want to look good in your bathing suit. Let's be honest. But let's also be even more brutally honest with ourselves. We all know how to lose weight. It's called diet and exercise, folks. But you want to cheat. I know you do. Just be honest. But if you're looking for a delicious snack but don't want all the sugars and calories, I got the solution. It's called Built Bar. Built Bars taste amazing, but they're not crammed chock full of sugar and calories and all that nonsense like all these other big store candy bars. No, each and every Built Bar, only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and guess what? A whopping 17 grams of protein as well. So it should definitely quench your hunger for a good while, get you past those munchy moments. We all know what I'm referring to there, right? Well, let's be real. Go to Built.com, find all the possible flavors you can imagine, plus many others at Walmart and Sam's Club as well. Lots of possibilities here for those of you in mid-Missouri. So again, if you're close to Sam's Club, run in, get a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, Brownie Butter Puff and Churro Puff, and you can thank me later. Thanks again for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. And for you everydayers coming up on the show this week, I want to delve into my financial background a little bit and explain why I think the current state of college football, especially when it comes to conference relocation, I think we're done for a little while. And I want to explain why that is, has everything to do with money. But you know what? Previously on the show, of course, I've been teasing for a while about Ricky Clemons Jr. And wait a second, is he the former Campbell guard? Played with Jesus Carolero, by the way. This is how I got onto this, the new Missouri Tiger transfer. Well, Here's the email from Stan Cole he's their associate AD over there, and he says, I basically am asked, hey, no follow-ups here, just satiate my curiosity. Is your Ricky Clemons the father of Ricky Clemons Jr., the former Missouri basketball player? And he says, no. Our Ricky is from Raleigh, North Carolina. No relation. Thanks for double-checking. He also goes on to say, by the way, he's also not related to our Chris Clemons, who finished his career in 2019 as the NCAA's third all-time leading scorer. So good bit of trivia there at the end. And most of the time when you hear the word no at the beginning of a sentence, that's a pretty clear indication, right? But now you got to tell me something. Does this make me a crazy person? Does this make me a jerk? You tell me. Am I suffering from some type of mental deficiency here? Because as soon as the person said no, I believed them. I really did. But as soon as Mr. Cole got into our Ricky is from Raleigh, North Carolina, I went, now wait a second here. Why are you adding that bit of detail? Because Ricky Clemons Jr. is from Raleigh, North Carolina, that doesn't prove that he's not related to Ricky Clemons Sr. In fact, Ricky Clemons Sr. was also from the Raleigh, North Carolina area at a certain point of his life. So I don't know. I still tend to believe that this guy knows what he's talking about. At the same time, did he have to throw in that little extra detail to make me doubt myself? So you know what, people? I did follow up and basically said, hey, thanks, just FYI, the Ricky Clemons Mizzou was from Raleigh area as well, hence my deep suspicions. No follow-up after that, so you know what? I'm just going to take them at their word and assume that this is not Ricky Clemons' son. And you know what? Still have no idea what the actual Missouri Ricky Clemons has been up to for all of these years. Googling, no idea whatsoever. So if anybody has any idea, I'd be kind of curious. I got to be honest. And of course, this is a Missouri basketball and football show, but you know what? With the postseason looming, let's talk about the diamond sports for just a bit. Of course, softball is going to be in the NCAA tournament once again after, I suppose, a somewhat disappointing season. Larissa Anderson and her program have set a pretty high standard over there off Stadium Boulevard for sure. But Missouri in the same regional with Oklahoma, who is 51-1 this season in softball. Let me say that again. 51-1? I didn't even know that was possible. I'm not the biggest softball guy in the world, but my goodness. I know enough to know that that is an absolutely insane number. So Missouri made the tournament, not giving them a great chance to move beyond the regional. But hey, if they happen to play Oklahoma, I mean, they're going to play Oklahoma, I do believe, right? That'll be must-see TV just to see if Missouri could possibly pull off the upset, right? See an all-time great type team there. And really, the NCAA softball tournament in general is a lot of fun. So I'll definitely be tuning in for that. As far as the men's side goes, the Missouri baseball team, well, they swept Georgia with a couple walk-off victories. And Tigers now have a pretty decent shot at definitely making the SEC tournament, which would certainly be a prerequisite, one would think, for making the NCAA tournament as well, despite the fact the Tigers are well under 500 in the SEC. They've still got a chance to make that field as well, so definitely keep tuned to that end of the SEC tournament. Now, speaking of Missouri baseball, I had a discussion a few days ago with a big-time Missouri baseball fan who has me a little bit more convinced that actually spending a little bit more on baseball could actually pay off. And really his opinions combined with a St. Louis Post-Dispatch article that I read a few days ago with some quotes from Steve Beazer, by the way, that I thought were really interesting. Number one, when asked about the support so far that the baseball program has received under the Desiree Reed-Francois administration, well, Beazer says it's 100% progress. That was his quote. So obviously he's getting more progress or more support, and actually Missouri had its best attendance that they've had ever at Taylor Stadium, which, I don't know, compared to other teams in the SEC, 32,400 people for the entire season is nothing to write home about. But when you're filling that crowd, like the coach says here, it makes a gigantic difference. As Missouri had over 2,000 in their 25-person, too much real estate talk here lately, 2,500-person capacity stadium was basically full for 5 games this year. And that's with, obviously, a team that has real weather problems, right? The problem is college baseball starts so early, like earlier than spring training type stuff. They're starting in February, basically. It's kind of hard to get the students and the locals into the program and into the season as much when it doesn't really get warm often until May, essentially. And then, well, now the season's kind of over. So Beazer is definitely pushing for a new stadium, certainly a new location for a stadium, as for whatever reason, it just seems like Taylor Stadium is one of the windiest spots, as was pointed out in that Post-Dispatch article. So just not necessarily the best location or the most convenient location or even the most fun location. You can imagine if that stadium were next to where the new softball stadium is, perhaps in that location, now you've got the ability to possibly do real softball, baseball doubleheaders. They're going to be really easy for your fans to attend both, to where they don't have to walk a mile across, Stadium Bowl or Providence, and the pedestrian bridge and all that stuff. So I do think there is a reason to believe that Missouri, considering how well they've performed despite a bunch of different disadvantages, taking late commercial flights, obviously the various other budgeting problems, that might be the biggest one of all. But considering all the disadvantages that Missouri has, the fact that they're on the cusp of perhaps making the NCAA tournament again, I think the program deserves a lot of credit for that. I really do. So give them a little bit more action, a little bit more to work with, I should say. And by the way, you've got a great product here. SEC baseball is the best college baseball there is. That's a good thing to sell too. So I do think there's a lot more upside in this program than even I thought before, after being convinced by people who know more than me. And coming up, if you're a NBA fan like myself, you certainly watched the Warriors and Lakers game, Game 6. Well, Bad Bunny, the famous Latino music star, hanging out, I guess, on a date with Kendall Jenner. And I got to say, I was like, wait a second. I thought Kendall Jenner and Devin Booker were an item. What happened there? Yes, Melvin Booker's son. Well, apparently they're Splitsville. Well, that got me thinking about Devin Booker, by the way. Missouri definitely wanted Devin Booker. Booker was considering the Tigers before ultimately going to Kentucky. Got me thinking. Remember the Frank Haith extension that never was by Mike Alden? What if Frank Haith extends Mike Alden? What happens then with Devin Booker? Well, let's talk about that and maybe some family dynamics that could have happened between the Bookers and the Jenners after these quick words. So obviously a lot of Missouri fans understandably raised their eyebrows when Eli Drinkwitz got a contract extension this past offseason. A lot of Tiger fans, including myself, were honestly thinking, gee, what has this guy done to deserve this? But pretty quickly you realize, oh, wait, this is how the game is played. At least that's how I realized it. And you have to go back, I think, to the Frank Haith move to Tulsa back in between the 14 and 15 seasons where Missouri winds up with Kim Anderson, obviously. Well, I think, obviously, a lot of people have hung their hat on how terrible Kim Anderson was to prove that, well, Missouri should have extended Frank Haith. I think the God's honest is, if I'm Mike Alden, would I have been 100% sure at that time that Frank Haith was my guy? Well, no, I wouldn't have been. And that part of the decision I can absolutely defend. But the problem is, I think what Missouri did this time around with Eli Drinkwitz was probably a better way to go around it. At least have the trappings of an extension, a literal, real extension, but also, protect yourself on the other end if things go south. Now, the thing is, some high school players, they're smart enough to realize how the game is played as well. But at the same time, if you're Frank Haith and you're going, wait, I'm not getting any contract extension at all, it's totally understandable why he went to Tulsa. So, end of the day, I don't really blame anybody for what happened, but there is the old hypothetical, right? What if Missouri felt a little differently about it? What if they played it slightly differently and maybe actually showed more faith in Haith after that third season? Maybe Devin Booker actually comes here. I don't know how much of a difference that makes long term, but certainly you end up avoiding the entire Kim Anderson era. You know, Devin Booker's probably one and done, probably averages 20 points a game at Missouri. He certainly had more shots than he did on that incredibly deep Kentucky team that included all kinds of different NBA players. But really, let's be honest, while all that's sort of interesting, the most interesting hypothetical of all is what would, let's say Kendall Jenner and Devin Booker would have gotten married. Well, then what would Melvin Booker and Caitlyn Jenner have talked about at Thanksgiving? That's all I really want to know. Just two great athletes comparing notes about their prime. Well, frankly, I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that. But thanks to all of you for being flies on the wall for my podcast today and listening to my kooky rantings about my favorite college sports program, of course, and yours as well, the Missouri Tigers. So, as always, join me the rest of the week whenever this pops up. Hopefully there's going to be some big news for Missouri any day now. When it happens, I'll be there for you. I can promise you that right here on Locked On Mizzou.